I started when I was 6 years old, I guess.
Growing up in school, I knew lots of people who played it. The Magic School. They were just a little bit older than I was. And I'd watch them play, but, I was too young. They wouldn't include me.
When I finally got a girlfriend, I actually had to co-opt her into playing the game because I didn't want to be forced to choose between having a girlfriend and playing Dungeons & Dragons.
I played it throughout high school and college. My ex-wife was somebody I met at a Dungeons & Dragons game. We played it together.
I'd like to bring out the co-creator of the Dungeons & Dragons game and one of the patriarchs of role-playing, Gary Gygax.
Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson invented Dungeons & Dragons in the very early 70s.
That was stirring, thank you.
The Tolkien series had become popular right before that, and they were fans of that and inspired by it.
It was in a little cardboard box, and it had 3 booklets, which are what are called digest size. It's the size of a typing paper folded in half.
And it was called Tactical Studies Rules. They printed 1,000 copies of it, thinking they'd probably never sell the first 1,000 copies.
It was basically just the simple idea of you're a character with a class, you've got some special abilities, you fight monsters, you roll dice, and so many of the things that we take for granted now were not in the original set.
Well, as history as it is, they sold those 1,000 copies in about a week. And there was a huge demand for them. They did another print run, and within a year they had sold 1 million copies.
The game took off. It became very popular, and by 1978 or 79, it had attracted the attention of the world and had established Dungeons & Dragons forever.
I'm sure you put it away in its proper place.
I'm sure.
First time I ever played Dungeons & Dragons was in 1978. I went to the local hobby game store, had like $30 in my pocket, and it was a choice between the latest big war game in a box or something Dungeons & Dragons, which I'd never actually heard of. But I had read the Tolkien books, and so I had an emerging interest in fantasy.
I never saw a scroll so hard to decode.
And so I thought, well, I'll give that a try. And so I bought the game with nobody to show me how to play or explain it. Took it to some friends of mine, and we were immediately hooked.
I started playing in 8th grade in about 1977, 78, so I was about 13, 14 years old. I played all through high school and then all through college, to the point where my obsession was such that I went to USC. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to school in Los Angeles. I went to USC auspiciously because of the journalism school, which I did. But the truth is, I had an obsession with staying in LA because, God forbid, we should break up the gang.
I'd just love to find a way to give those mages some payback. I hadn't actually played D&D until I went to the Gen Con convention in Milwaukee. And I actually was playing with Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson.
Come on, Sales. I thought you said this was gonna be easy.
No, I said it wasn't impossible. I loved it. Are you gonna jump?
You gonna catch me?
I promise. Now jump. Sorry.
I was a totally failed jock. I was too small for basketball, football, everything. The only sport they let me play was wrestling because there was somewhere where my size wouldn't get in the way. So I got into Dungeons & Dragons because it was like an alternative life.
Hey, Snails. Snails.
Dungeons & Dragons was the first role-playing game. When Gary and Dave invented Dungeons & Dragons, they really created a whole new paradigm in games.
Snails, don't touch that!
The idea that you could do anything that you wanted to do, go anywhere you wanted.
What are you doing?
The game is an opportunity for people to explore what it would be like to be a hero, a person that they would see in a movie or read about in a novel or see in a TV show. But instead of somebody else putting words in that person's mouth...
That must be the only way she can get guys to come home with her.
I'd have to put a feeble mind spell on myself to want to take you home.
The individual players get to do that for themselves.
It's psychodrama. There are no characters in Dungeons & Dragons except the ones you make up.
People like that they actually have a character who is like a person in a story.
Back then, that was the closest thing to an interactive game you really had, and so it was really cool, and I loved all the pictures that were in the book. I think the visuals bring people in. I think people initially see the visuals, then they want to know more. Then you get something like the Monster Manual, and you get to read about 200 different creatures.
There's literally hundreds of monsters. Creatures like orcs and trolls and ogres and giants, which are basically just like humans, but often bigger and uglier and more bestial. And some really weird looking monsters like the Beholder, which is this big floating ball with eye stalks coming off of it that can send out death rays.
Then there's offshoots, green slime, gray ooze, there's skeletons, there's gnomes.
The weird fungus monsters, like mushrooms that scream at you.
There's this great thing I always loved to pull on people in dungeons, which is called a mimic. And what it looks to you like when you walk up to it is a treasure chest. So you're like, oh, that's cool. And so you're going to go and open the treasure chest. And when you go to open it, the treasure chest actually comes to life and the arms come out of the side of the chest. And then the eye and the mouth actually opens, and the mimic tries to actually bite you.
You'll also have dragons.
You have red dragons, you have gold dragons, you have black dragons, you have chromatic dragons. I mean, there's so many, it's impossible to list them all.
It really is sort of a fantastic environment.
It's a game played with a combination of storytelling and probability.
Basically, you get your group together. You get a big, huge table, a lot of paper, maybe a hexagonal map. You might have a little metal figurine that represents your character, where they are on that hexagonal map. And you have a dungeon master. Dungeon master in D&D is basically God of that world, of that game.
It's kind of like a writer for a book. This person will sit down and design what the landscape is, what the world is, and so on, and so what the plot is going to be for the characters.
So the players will all sit down and they'll roll dice to hit their main attributes.
And you have like strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma.
So you roll the dice, and once you've rolled them, you might get, you roll 3 6-sided dice to make them. So your score could be anywhere from 3 to 18. Say you rolled an 18 dexterity. Well, that would make you a thief, because thieves need to be agile, they need to be able to get behind you so they can backstab, they need to do lots of different things. Then once everybody makes their character sheets, the dungeon master introduces to you the basics of the story. They'll say, okay, campaign's going to start in a tavern. You're in a tavern. You're all sitting at a table. So now you imagine the 6 of you are in this tavern. He describes to you the tavern and who's in the tavern.
And there's a suspicious-looking guy at the bar who's furtively looking around, and then people will make choices about actions to take. Well, let's go investigate. And then he'll inevitably say, there's gold in them our hills.
And so then you either say yay or nay. Do you trust this guy? Is it a trap?
Have you lost your damn mind?
You got to consider everything, because the dungeon master's thought all these things out, or he'll modify things as you play the game and trick you, because it's really a game where you have to use your mind.
I don't know about you, but this sounds like a pretty bad idea to me. Oh, it gets better.
Anything that can happen to you in real life can happen in the game.
Finally, though, usually the group has to reach a consensus of what they want to do.
And we're all dirt poor at this stage, so we'll all go off in search of the gold, and you'll arm yourself and outfit yourself, and off you go.
Movie the size of my fist?
Our game ultimately got incredibly elaborate. I brought all my old D&D maps in to show you. The more elaborate it gets, the deeper you can get into it.
We'd have like a group of 6 guys that would play that game like pretty much every night after school, and every night, all through the weekend. We'd have like sleepover parties.
I would say the longest individual campaign within the many campaigns we did in the game that we played probably lasted about an entire summer.
It's a great game. It's actually a really good social game.
All right, this is it. This is the entrance to the dungeon.
It's one of the few games that you'll play where everybody is actually working together. The whole game is based around the entire group working together to conquer the dungeon.
The dungeons are really fun because you run into traps and you run into places where there's like 4 doors, but you're told up front that like 3 of them are the wrong way to go, and you've got to figure out how to pick the right one. But there's only one clue in the room that will show you what the right one is, but you have to figure out yourself what that clue in the room is. So you have to start asking the dungeon master, so what does this look like? What does that look like? And then you have to envision it in your head. And then after you envision it in your head, and then hopefully you come up with a solution.
Great.
Or you walk through the wrong door and you find that you're falling through a bottomless pit that never ends, and you'll be falling for eternity.
As you get older, you learn that there's more to the world than the dungeon. There are dragons, yes, but there are also evil villains. You can go to other planes of existence. Eventually, a story starts to emerge.
The great thing about D&D is it's like real life. If your character survives an adventure, you get experience points for a certain number of them. As you get more experience, the level of your character increases. As you learn more things, the level of you goes up so that you can do something greater the next time.
How did you do that?
The elven peoples do not require spells to work with magic. You use magic. We are part of it.
And it's all a metaphor. It's no longer just there's treasure in the hills. That's like so mundane at that point. You're going after much bigger things and you're playing out psychological dramas of your own obsession. And that's powerful. It's powerful stuff.
I think that that's where Dungeons & Dragons really starts to become a really fascinating, more like a hobby than a game. It becomes something that, like a piece of art that you really create.
People get confused. They say, but I don't understand, it's a game, how do you win? You don't win. The point is the game is a metaphor for life. There's no destination, the fun of the journey is the whole point.
You have the shared life with your friends where you as a group of people have brought your characters together and your characters together have faced these challenges and you have that sort of shared saga. And that's one of the ways that characters grow from being a set of stats to being a sort of person that feels real the way a character in a movie or a book feels real.
Nice.
D&D is a great training ground to make people better human beings. It teaches all of the values that we want our kids to learn.
For one, a group of players are going to have to learn some amount of teamwork, cooperation, and getting along with other people, because one of the cool things about Dungeons & Dragons is you're not playing against the other players. All the players are together as an adventuring band, and they're fighting the monsters in the game, not each other.
Oh, clear. It's also working on your problem-solving skills. You get a set of rules and you get a set of different problems. You have to overcome those problems and you have to do it together with the rest of the group because every person in that group has a different set of abilities and they all need to work together in order to accomplish the goal.
There's resource management skills because there's an economy, you know. You want that cool new set of armor, you've got to save up enough gold to go get it.
The one thing I learned in the game that I didn't have a particularly good grasp on in real life as a young person was patience.
Sorry, snails.
That sometimes running, pell-mell into battle might be fun, but ultimately if you really have a serious goal in mind.
This is the map you're after. Clear path. And I'll put it out.
It might not be the shrewdest way to go about achieving something.
Do it.
And sometimes you don't have to kill your enemies, sometimes you can simply outlive them.
Unlike a lot of other properties that evolve out of people's imagination or movies or TV series or whatnot, the people who inhabit the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons have been very multicultural and very diverse. Your skin color or your ethnicity or your religious tradition is totally irrelevant because all the characters are completely imaginary. And it's just as easy to imagine that your character is a green-skinned elf as it is to imagine that your character is a black character.
The game has a lot of rules, and the reason for that is you're trying to simulate a whole world.
The game consists of a series of 200-plus page books, so you have to be a really good reader. And there's a lot of math, although the math is not terribly complex. It's fractions and percentages and statistics.
So kids that play it end up learning a lot about something and learn how to handle a very complex number of rules. I think that that's a very strong benefit in terms of reading comprehension and critical thinking skills. The rules had not been updated since the late 80s, and so the game really was out of date.
A company called Wizards of the Coast ended up buying it, and they make Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, and the owner was an avid D&D player. It was his lifelong dream to own that company and relaunch D&D.
It is my privilege to announce 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. Ladies, for my company to have been able to acquire TSR and especially to be able to do 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, it's just been like a dream come true.
A lot of people are speculating on where Dungeons & Dragons is going, and I would say that there are two things you can look for in the future. One is a bigger presence on the computer.
It's perfect for online gaming, which is something that wasn't even thought of or even possible when it first came out.
Dungeons & Dragons has been with us for almost 30 years. It still sells really, really well, and I see no reason why it won't continue to be a part of us for many years to come.
Thieves, knights, clerics, and wizards, agents, managers, lawyers, and actors. I mean, what is it? I mean, I've played a role.
It will continue to be something that serves as a training ground for the imaginations of a lot of kids that go on to be movie directors or mathematicians or engineers or whatever it is that they want to be.